Thank you very much, Professor Catherine Pearson. I think we'll proceed with our other two panelists, and then we'll have general discussion. So we'll turn to Jennifer next. Jennifer Young.
Well, I wish I had had some of the knowledge that Catherine just imparted, because in Texas, for our community, the horse is out of the barn. We are in Chapter 11. I thought I would just take a few minutes to explain some terminology that I may throw in later. The term debtor would be the organization that filed Chapter 11. The term creditor generally means, as Catherine described, could be the residents, could be the trade vendors. Trade vendors, for example, are the food suppliers, the paper suppliers, and then you have the secured lenders, and they are the banks and the bond holders. So when Sears Methodist is a corporation that has 11 communities, only 5 are CCRCs. 3 were just managing the state veterans' homes, and they did that on a for-profit basis. Sears Methodist, as a corporation, was nonprofit. My community, Meadow Lake, was the new kid on the block. If you look at a map of the state of the United States, Texas is big. And so we in Tyler were way east, and the bulk of everything was west. So trying to even find the names and addresses of fellow residents in the other communities was difficult, because it's like trying to get information out of a black hole. At Meadow Lake, we have an interesting situation in that our resident chair, our resident council chair, was a retired Sears Methodist executive. So to expect him to do something, I discovered, was not really easy. Texas does not require disclosure, so we residents were more or less blindsided, although because Meadow Lake was, they broke ground for Meadow Lake in 2009, which, if you remember the recession, that was a terrible time to break ground and then try to fill up a community. I knew Meadow Lake was in trouble. Mainly because when you see empty lots of houses that hadn't been built, and you see some houses that, you know, someone had died and were awaiting a new resident, you know things are not too good. Meadow Lake was also not part of an obligated group. Obligated group, capital O, capital G, is a special term, and I'm going to make it real. I mean, I could probably be corrected from a legal sense of what it really means, but think of it as a group of communities or entities within a corporation that together say we can borrow through our strength together. And so therefore, we'll form this obligated group for our debt. I knew that Meadow Lake was not part of the obligated group of Sears Methodist. I don't want to get too technical here. And I knew it was non-obligated. So when I heard while we were traveling that there was a filed Chapter 11, a resident called me while we were on the road, and it was well into the conversation before I realized that resident was talking about the whole system, not just Meadow Lake, stuck out in the east of Texas, brand new kid on the block, non-obligated. It was the whole enchilada. I also want to personally thank Jack Cumming. I emailed him from the road saying, "Here's the latest, Jack." And he immediately found for me an attorney in Dallas that specialized in bankruptcy, saying, "You better talk to this person, get something going." He also told me something very, very relevant, and that was try to get on the court-appointed committee And then I learned something eventually about court-appointed committees. More on that in a minute. Because this was the unsecured creditor committee, yes. And the legal fees are not a case of that committee pooling funds. The legal fees are paid by the debtor, or as some people call it, or maybe legally, the bankrupt estate pays the legal fees for the committee to hire its own law firm. So here I was on the road, and I was, believe it or not, worried about protocol. I thought, I can't, start doing something from the road when we've got a council. Because of my travel schedule, I declined being on the council. So I wasn't even on the council for 2014. And the head of the council was this ex-Sears Methodist executive who had been told, oh, don't worry about anything. The debtor's attorney will take care of everything, and we won't settle this case on the backs of the residents. I was prepared to pay this attorney with my credit card as I talked to him on the cell phone, thinking I can't just think free advice as I'm traveling down the road. The attorney I contacted, I actually emailed him thanks to the contact information that Jack Cumming gave me, and explained who I was and what Sears Methodist was, thinking I need to provide this background. And I said, here's my cell phone number, and I will have my credit card ready to pay you for your time just to talk with me. He called me, and two nice things happened. We talked for an hour, and I didn't lose the call because of going from one cell to the other, as sometimes happens on the road. And he explained a little bit more about the unsecured creditor committee. He also did not take my money. He said he couldn't because there was no engagement letter, but first of all, he said, you don't have to tell me about the Sears Methodist case. He said that goes out on this email network he was a bankruptcy specialist, immediately, and he said it was definitely noticed because a case this size doesn't hit the Dallas courts too often. He said, so I was already reading about it when later in an email, I hear from you, a resident. So he is when Jack and I returned to Meadow Lake from our trip, I found that nothing had happened. I talked to a couple from Virginia earlier this morning who said the residents hired their own law firm. Because I had been told about this unsecured creditor committee and the attempt to get residents on that committee along with trade vendors, I knew that was high priority because the attorney that I had talked with, and his name is Richard Grant, and they have an interesting, and I won't go into it now, an interesting way of charging for their services. They're in multi-states, multi-cities, and I really lucked out through that referral that Jack Cumming, I guess from the internet. Anyway, Richard sent me an email saying the formation meeting of that unsecured creditor, the formation meeting to create the committee is this coming Thursday. So at that point, I emailed this resident council chair, ex-Sears Methodist executive, saying, you don't have time to dawdle. We have to get our applications in, and some of us want to go drive 100 miles west to Dallas to get on the committee. So we did so. Three residents from Meadow Lake went. Also, the resident chair who really wanted to be on that committee. And as someone pointed out to me, how sure could you be that he wouldn't kind of nicely inform his prior management relationships of what was going on? The unsecured creditor committee is formed by kind of an arm of the court that's called the U.S. trustee, and kind of think of them as a traffic cop. They're there to have the creditors come in for the meeting, and of course there's law firms hovering out in the hall and everything, because they know that the committee's first responsibility is to hire a law firm, and they want the gig. Richard Grant was there wanting the gig, and I don't blame him a bit. But I had him well geared towards the resident side of things. As it turns out, the trustee wanted to have at least 2 residents on this unsecured creditor committee. A prior bankruptcy, same court, same judge, had a second creditor committee of nothing but residents. Now that also would have had its legal fee. They could have, if one had been established, that second committee could have also hired a law firm and had its legal fees paid by the bankrupt estate according to bankruptcy law. But those fees are drains on a turnip that's running out of, you know how you can't get blood out of a turnip. So to ask, I was hoping for a complete second committee of just residents. Richard Grant was, excuse me, hoping the same thing. But we didn't get that because there were just the 3 of us from the same CCRC at the formation meeting. The CCRCs out west in Sears Methodist, I don't think the residents had even been told of the filing of Chapter 11. Plus, that in my opinion, the U.S. Trustee's Office, in notifying people of the formation meeting, didn't explain that serving on a committee doesn't mean you have to come to Dallas every week. Now, you're talking about people in far west Texas. The concept of travel probably, but no one had explained to them the meetings will be telephonic. You can be in your own living room and be part of the meeting. None of that was adequately explained, and I'm hoping at some point when this is all over with to buttonhole the judge or the U.S. trustee to say, you know, it should have been better explained what committee membership means. The U.S. trustee at the formation meeting selected yours truly to serve, and this was really to the joy of my compadres that came with me to the formation meeting. She hoped to get a resident from West Texas later, which she did. And then there are 3 trade vendors. But since I was the only resident and only 2 trade vendors were selected that day, there were only 3 of us to hire the law firm. So I was outnumbered, and Richard Grant did not get the gig. We gave each of the 9 law firms that were hovering out there in the foyer 10 minutes to explain their credentials, their past experience, and explain their fees. So one thing that I would say to anybody, if you have friends or if the proactive information that Catherine just gave you is fantastic. I took my own notes. But if it happens after the fact, here are the key things I want you to maybe remember. The bankruptcy courts are recognizing, fortunately, the role of residents as being unsecured creditors. They have a unique classification. They are contingent unsecured creditors, meaning none of us could say, we were supposed to get a refund and we didn't get a refund. No. Our situation was, according to the contracts, we are supposed to get a refund when a new person comes in. That seems, a new resident comes in. That seems to be pretty, so that's in the future. But we want the current contracts that we all signed to at least be honored by any potential new owner. So I would say make sure that residents know that they are unsecured creditors in the eyes of the court. Try to get on the one committee, and then if you can possibly swing it, get a second committee named, which has been done, and it happened in Dallas, a prior case. Yeah, I don't think Erickson had the two committees. I think it was that third one, Lincolnshire. I think it was a Lincolnshire. Had two committees. I could be wrong on that. Catherine reminded, by just saying that, the good news is the Dallas court was where the Erickson case was filed and the Lincolnshire case was filed. Both had the same judge that we have. Both successfully had the resident contracts honored. Now, I found it very interesting what Catherine was talking about related to deepening insolvency and staying in business long after suitors might have been interested. I don't know, but a suitor came forward and filed a letter of intent, and it was filed on 9/11, that's how I remember the date. And on the 30th, they pulled out. And their letter of intent had a blend. I thought maybe the obligated group and the non-obligated would somehow be separated. They had a blend of what they wanted. They kind of cherry-picked the communities, and they wanted to manage the 3 veterans' homes because that was a for-profit endeavor. But they pulled out at the last minute. So now, as I leave this session in Nashville, I'm going to go home and wonder, oh my gosh, because there has been utter silence. As a committee member, I haven't even been told of a new meeting to discuss anything. There has been absolute silence on any potential new suitors. Meadow Lake, my community, was in the court documents early on as being for sale. And I thought it was because we were new, it was new construction, and because we were non-obligated. But maybe that isn't as crucial as I thought, but just the fact that one suitor pulled out and we've had silence since the 1st of October makes me a little worried, and maybe they're all going to be auctioned off, and then we have to hope that whoever bids on the CCRCs are willing to honor those resident contracts. So I'll now pass the microphone to Jack.